Okay, so I'd just like to say welcome. This is week 20 of Survive and Thrive. Can you believe it? We started this at the beginning of April as a weekly occurrence to support our community and support the local businesses and getting through lockdown. And we continue to do so as so many people are working from home. We're bringing you a series of events in collaboration with the Gatwick Diamond Business Club. And we're very grateful to the European Regional Development Fund for helping us to bring you these sessions. Hopefully you found them very informative, and you know the subjects have been varied from mental health through to future marketing and all sorts of different subjects throughout the way. This week we'll be introducing Hannah and Simon in a moment, but I'd just like to give you some information about, let me just close this share, how to contribute. There's a chat, so you can add any questions throughout on the right hand side just through chatting. Make sure that you're open to all panelists and all attendees, or just all panelists if you prefer to, or specifically to me if that's what you'd like to do. I'd just like to introduce, let me just get my screen correct here. So this week we welcome, get this right, Cheerful 21st, who are friends of the centre and are both down in Falmer today, Hannah and Simon. Cheerful 21st is well, they introduce themselves as a creative brand experience agency made up of creative warriors. They've been game-changing since 1985, and we're very pleased to have you both here. So thank you so much for being here to present on creativity. And I'm going to pass over to you now and to introduce yourselves.
Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for having us. I'm thrilled to be in your facility here and also to talk on this topic. As you mentioned and just introduced us, Cheerful 21st is a creative brand experience agency. We're game changers since 1985, so we've been around for a little over 30 years. And when we talk about brand experience, our specialty is in live events, hybrid events and virtual events, as well as moving image and digital engagement. And we have a group of creative warriors at Cheerful 21st. We have a very diverse group within the team. The backgrounds of some of the members of our team range from theatre all the way through to medicine. And it really benefits us in terms of our brainstorming sessions that we get different perspectives on projects and on briefs. As I said, we're a very creative agency, but everything that we do is very purpose driven, very strategic in our execution. And that's my role as a creative director, is to make sure that we're being as creative as possible and looking at all the different disciplines in which we can engage with audiences. And then Hannah, who will introduce herself, is part of the strategy side. And I'll let Hannah introduce herself actually.
Thanks, Simon. So I'm Hannah Luffman. I am Strategy Director for the agency and also for the group. So we have offices in EMEA and also a US offering. So one of the things that I do in terms of our global working, and particularly in a virtual sense, is look at the strategic side behind those connections. So Simon and I work really closely together, but my role comes from the theory of learning and the education that sits behind that. So I have a qualification in EYFS, which is an early years foundation study. So it's the theory of learning and the creative application to that. So my role really is to look at the strategy behind what we're trying to do with our virtual programs and with our virtual teams, and the ways that we can break down barriers, both as team members and as managers. And then I hand it to Simon and he creatively pulls it together into a program.
That's great, thank you. Hannah, can you start by telling us a little bit more about the theory behind creativity?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing to say is it is a common misconception that our creative learning theory changes as we grow, and actually that's not what happens. So while it seems funny that I have an early years qualification and that I talk about adult engagement and the theory of creativity, actually the way that we learn doesn't change as we move through our educational process, and particularly as we move through our adulthood and in our working lives. So the EYFS Foundation is all based around play. So if anybody has children under 5, ever did, or has spent any time with a child under 5, you will know that all of their learning and all of the toys that are designed for them, they're all based around play, and they're based around sensory play. So whether or not that's physically picking stuff up, whether or not it's the smell, the sound, the engagement, all of the sensory touch points that you have, and every time you get a Christmas present you think it's just another Lego kit or it's just another early learning center toy. It's not. The theory that's gone in behind that as to how they're going to be able to go through their educational learning journey through that environment of playing is very well researched, and that really fits into the piece that they're doing. So if we take, I'm going to use an example, and there's kind of 3 key themes that we can take out of that carry on into adulthood. So one of the typical toys that you will see is the tessellation toy. And that's the one where there's different holes and there's different shapes. And you have to get the square in the square and the triangle in the triangle and the circle. And the beauty of that toy, firstly, is its simplicity. So the first thing that we know about creative theory is that it should be really simple. So when we give our teams space for creative learning, particularly in virtual, we need to take away all of the barriers and we need to make it as simple as the tessellation toy. And Simon will talk a little bit about that simplicity, because there's definitely a confusion that creativity is for creatives, but actually, if we're particularly in management positions, we're assuming that we want every single member of our team to have a creative approach to problem solving. So whatever their business issue is, whatever the problem is that we want them to break down, whatever it is that we want them to take to market, we're expecting them to approach that creatively, because that's how they're going to get to the end solution. So firstly, there's the simplicity in the early learning phases and the simplicity in that toy, and that's really important. The second thing about that toy as well is that you don't give that to them at the same time as saying, while you're working out that toy, could you also work out how to fill the sand pit at the same time as draining the water tank? And also, could you just work on your social skills with Joe? It's not what we do. What we do is we give them dedicated space to focus on the one piece of creative learning that we're asking them to do. So that dedicated environment that we put them in, whether it's playgroup, whether it's home, whether or not we have a playroom at home, whatever it is, we give them dedicated learning space. And we ask them to creatively solve that problem, not as point number 8 in their 10-point bullet list of things that we're expecting a 2-year-old to learn today. So the second thing is there's a simplicity, and then there's a dedicated learning space for creativity. But one of the most important things about the EYFS model that we get wrong as we get older is the freedom to fail. So one of the things with the creativity is if we've got a child and they're playing with their toy and they're putting the triangle in the square and the circle in the triangle and it's all going wrong, we don't criticize them at that point. What we do is we wait for them to put the circle in the circle, and then we say, you are the smartest damn child I have ever seen. But in order for them to get the circle in the circle, they have to go through a number of failures. So we fail and we fail and we fail again, and that's what allows us to come up with the creative output. The theory behind that is the neurological pathways that actually say that we learn more through failure. So the way that we know that that's the right output is by going through all of the ones that fail. In yoga, if you're much into yoga, they tell you that the best way to learn how to do tree pose is to fall out and fall out and fall out. Because what happens in your neurological pathways to that pose is that you say, well, if I put my foot here, I'll fall to the left. If I put it here, I'll fall to the right. The learning point comes from that pathway of failures that says, okay, great, so I have to put my foot in the middle. And that's where the success comes from. And that's how we teach creativity in childhood. What happens as we get older is we have all of the problems with the learnt environment. So what then happens is we say, well, firstly, I'm too embarrassed to continue trying my tree pose. My managers definitely don't give me space to fail. There isn't room for that. The deadline's tomorrow, so where am I going to find this creative pace? And I'm quite embarrassed if I put the square in the triangle. So we have all of these learnt issues in these environments. There's so much about culture in terms of creativity as well. And so then what happens is we find the creative. So Simon and I will have as much creative freedom as we want to go off and brainstorm wonderful things. But actually there are people in project management, in finance, in production, in technical, who are also expected to have a creative approach. So that's kind of the theory that we get to in those key things. So that's dedicated learning space, simplicity of creativity, and allowing failure. So I guess what also mirrors my job is that I present the theory and then Simon takes on the practical creative side. So I'll pass to Simon to take it from here.
Thanks, Hannah. So there's a few different points that sort of Hannah raised in there, and I, as a very creative visual person, I've actually prepared a few slides. So if you'll indulge me, I'm actually going to pivot to a couple of different slides where we can talk about some practical tips to make your teams as creative as possible. Hoping that everyone can see that. thumbs up. That's what I like, thumbs up. So one of the first practical tips is that we are spending more and more time on screen. And in terms of if you're presented with a brainstorming challenge or a creative challenge within your team, then it's always good to, before the brainstorm, is to share that with each of the members of your brainstorming team beforehand, and then encourage them to go off screen, get out into the wilderness, get out into the world, stay away from the actual screen. Because you're just going to get a little bit more clarity. You're going to remove all the distractions from your thinking, and you can just focus in on just what that challenge is. Plus, you're also going to take some inputs from around you. So if you're in the screen, you're just going to be focused on the screen, and there's going to be email alerts coming up and all these different things. So it's important to take that time away from the screen. Really encourage our team at Cheerful 21st to listen to podcasts and just get away from, spreadsheets and all that sort of stuff, and to start thinking more creatively and taking influence from different things. The second thing is that when people do come back from that non-screen time and being in the environment, is that we're creating a space where we can foster creativity. And the first thing that we encourage people to do when joining that brainstorming session on a Zoom chat or anything on virtual is to make sure that their desk space is nice and clean. So try and put your phone away, that notebook with all your different things that you need to do for that day, put that away. Just really simplify it down. So that was Hannah's point again about that simplicity, just trying to remove all those different objects and items from your desk that just is going to clutter your thinking. So just keep everything really neat and tidy. In fact, before this session, me and Hannah were talking about a client of ours who's very, very focused on creativity. That's her prime role at her agency and her company. And what she does is she just turns the camera off during her brainstorming session, and then she'll do something like ironing and just listening to the brainstorming session. So her mind is sort of 50% focused on this remedial task, but the rest of her is just completely zoned in at the problem at hand, and it really assists her in sort of focusing in on being creative. So that's an interesting approach, and I think my wife would be very happy with me doing more ironing at home when I do my brainstorming sessions from now on. The other thing that's really helpful is creating a bit of a sense of a team atmosphere. We want people who are joining this brainstorming session to feel confident to bring up an idea, whether they think it's good or bad. So you really want to sort of generate a very team atmosphere. And there's a couple of things that you can do here to encourage people to feel like they're unified as one creative force. A simple thing is that you ask people to prepare a drink beforehand. So bring their favorite cup of coffee, and everyone sits there, and the first thing you do is you cheers at the beginning of your session. So everyone, you can break the ice by talking about your favorite drink or your favorite mug or cup of coffee, whatever it is. The second thing you can do is have a team color that you wear. So everyone has to wear red on the session, or everyone has to wear their favorite hat, their thinking hat perhaps. And then with everyone then on screen, everyone feels as though they're part of a group. You can go through at the beginning of that brainstorming session, asking individuals about their favorite hat or why they decided to wear that. And suddenly you don't have any wallflowers. You've broken the ice. People feel comfortable to be able to talk. And there's a point that me and Hannah are discussing, which is the people in your brainstorming session need to be contributors. We want everyone in that brainstorming session to contribute to the conversation and feel as though they can contribute to the conversation. The next practical tip seems like an obvious one, but it's a blank piece of paper. Make sure that you have blank pieces of paper on the table for people to scribble down ideas and when thoughts are coming to themselves. Not a piece of paper from their notebook that has the hit list of everything they need to do at the 2 o'clock session or the shopping list or any of that sort of stuff. We're talking about blank pieces of paper. Now, there is another technique with a blank piece of paper in which you can actually create just a series of boxes, maybe 4 or 5 boxes in which people have to put their ideas into. Now, this is an interesting technique because it actually forces you to not rest on your laurels by coming up with one good idea, but it leaves you 4 extra boxes to then go, right, okay, that's one idea, compartmentalized, boom, let's move on to the next one. Let's try and think of something new for this one. I've got 2 more to go, and work your way through that. So there is a little bit of a structure. Some people are a little bit scared by a blank piece of paper. But the boxes thing is a very handy thing to put into practice. And it could be just a simple exercise of asking people at the beginning of the session to draw 4 squares on their page, and then you move forward from there. The other really important thing about having paper in front of you during a virtual session like this is to be able to sketch your ideas down. There's 2 really important things about this. The first one is that it's a starting point. It's making it real. So it's not just a conversation. It's not something that's floating through the ether that can get lost. It's down on paper and it's a starting point. And you don't have to be an amazing artist to create a sketch of your idea or this concept, but sketch it. Just make sure it's down on paper, and that becomes the starting point for refinement and more conversation about it. The other really important thing about sketching down items onto a page or sketching down your ideas is a bit of a technique that Pixar use when they're developing their stories for their films. And the philosophy is to be wrong quickly. So in their storyboarding sessions, they have some of the most amazing artists available to them. But if you look at the behind the scenes of a DVD, you'll see that their storyboard is chicken scratch. It's like terrible drawings, terrible. But the key of it is that they're road testing the idea and what people are saying and what the character, how they're interacting and what emotional cues are sort of being developed from the scene. And the philosophy of this be wrong quickly is that you don't want to put too much effort into sort of refinement just to realize that actually that wasn't a very good idea. So if you get it wrong quickly, you're actually saving yourself time further down the line. So that's a really good tip. And you don't have to be an amazing artist. So I actually drew that that sketch on that page there, and I'll sign it later and everyone can have a copy. The other one is, in terms of creativity, is basically diversifying your sources. So if you're only looking on websites within your industry, then you're only going to get results and ideas and thinking that's coming from that industry. So just diversify. Like, I think there's a lot of really great podcasts that I listen to in which every episode is just a completely different topic. I think it's 99% Invisible is a great one. There's a couple of other ones which are just 20-minute sessions, and they just deal with a completely different industry or topic or production value, all that sort of stuff. And what's really interesting about looking at different sources is that you can see similarities to your own business, and then you take out the McNuggets, I call them, of quality that you can then use to your own challenges. And I think being diverse and looking for a whole range of different creative sources is good, but always come back to how can what I'm seeing or what I'm listening to help my business or help the challenge that I have in front of me. And this is a little bit about the importance of having a diverse group when you're doing your online sessions. You want everyone to participate, but you do not want to have 10 people who are all graphic designers, because then you'll just get a graphic design solution. You want to have a diverse group within your brainstorming session to get different perspectives. An interesting story, I did a team building exercise in which you had a plate and a mug that came, a ceramic plate and mug that I asked the team to paint. And then that goes off and gets fired and it comes back as a gift for the team. Now we had an artist in the team, and her plate and mug combo was immaculate. It was beautiful. It had forest creatures on it. It was very, very detailed with the brush strokes. It was a beautiful crafted piece and it looked lovely. Now the sales guy that was on the team, he wasn't an artist by any means, but he drew a very rudimentary sort of robot on the plate that was towering over the city, and it was sort of crushing about. It looked like a Beastie Boys film clip. But then on his mug, he just drew a couple of different circles. And I asked him, so what's with the mug? And he said, well, this is the remote control to the robot. And like, you wouldn't say he's in sales. You wouldn't arguably say that he's more creative, or you wouldn't think of him as creative as the artist who did this beautiful piece. But that in itself was a very great conceptual concept, but a creative concept, in which I would say that he was so valuable, and then looking at things from a different perspective. So he was a valuable part of every creative team. So we had someone that was about the craftsmanship and another person that was about the concept. So everyone is creative and can sort of apply their own perspective to a challenge. The other thing that we were talking about, or Hannah was mentioning, was just about the ability to make failures and this concept of messy play. Now, in the virtual space, this is very difficult because you want collaboration between team members on, your virtual chat. But you need a platform, or you need some sort of common ground where you can actually start throwing up ideas and start throwing those thoughts up. We've used in the past, Dropbox Paper is a very handy tool. It works almost like a virtual whiteboard where people can throw images up that they've found online whilst you're in the brainstorming session. Others can make comments, others can correct. You can shift things around. You can put videos up. And what's nice is it just keeps filtering down and becoming this really long sort of timeline of your thinking. And it doesn't have to end at that session, because then you can do, after that session, you want people to sort of think a little bit more about the ideas that they've come up with in their brainstorming session. They can go back to that platform like Dropbox Paper and start throwing in a few more things. When we're doing virtual events, we find that we have a Q&A and a chat function on our virtual events. So when we have like a breakout session with multiple people on screen, we use that chat function for people to be able to throw up imagery and to continue that conversation. So when someone writes down a really interesting, or someone comes up with a really interesting idea as part of that brainstorming session, then on the chat function and on the Q&A section, the notes section, they can just start putting up some of those details, so that you're almost doing exactly the same as what's happening with Dropbox Paper. You have this dual virtual conversation that's happening between us, like it is now, but also you have a space where we're making it real, we're putting up the references, and there's something that people can refer back to and start making comments on. And that works really well. So when you've started collaborating, getting all those ideas into a pretty solid space, a very important exercise is to try fusing them together. So you have concept A, and in this analogy, I've got the phone and the camera, and camera phones are just almost like the biggest selling point of a phone now. But I think it's a great way of actually sort of testing your ideas and seeing if you can actually take the best of one idea and take the best of another idea and smash them together and see if you can create something even better. And it's a good way of actually working out the negatives and positives of a concept as well. And working out whether that's actually going to fulfill the purpose that you need it to fulfill. And then once you've gone through all that sort of process and you've got through a little bit of a hit list of ideas that are working, you call it battling it out. So you basically road test your ideas against each other, and they fight, and you pick out the strengths and the weaknesses. And it's a good way of identifying what's really important from your objectives, and whether an idea is going to stand the test of time. Now, it's a tricky thing in the virtual space, because when you have two people discussing the pluses and negatives of a concept, people generally have a little bit of a vested interest in either one idea or another, and that can be a little bit challenging with people talking over each other, especially if you have like 5 to 10 people in a chat. So a great way of getting around that is actually to put hats on people. Maybe the physical hats like in the team building exercise, but a physical hat where someone takes the perspective of the positives of an idea and another person takes the perspective of the negatives of an idea. And then those individuals have an opportunity and have the space to be able to talk through those points. And then another person has the opportunity to talk through the positive of those points. And then rather than everyone trying to talk over each other, you can look at it from a holistic point of view and go, you know what, this idea is actually standing out best. So they're the few practical tips that I have on creativity. Hopefully they're helpful.
Yeah, really helpful. It's really good. The whole fail fast analogy is something that we talk of lots at the Innovation Centre, and it's obviously something it's really important, I think, for so many aspects of business. You don't feel as if you can't try something. If it doesn't work, don't do it again, but make a decision quickly.
Yeah, well, there's the concept of when you're developing any technology of the MVP, the minimum viable product, because that way you identify what your audience are really interested in and usability, and
you've got to test the hypothesis and find out, haven't you? So you've got to find out quickly, and that's something that we talk about a lot. And something else that I took out of your presentation there is the positive and negative hats. I can see that happening in our huddles moving forward quite a few of my team are on here, I think, and coloured hats or coloured days. I think it's a great idea for bringing.
Well, there's actually an exercise. I can't remember the name of the system, but it's where there's actually 6 hats. You know, so there's someone that takes the pessimist and the optimist role, and then there's someone that takes the emotional, and someone takes the fact-based role. Can't remember what the other 2 are, but it helps when people have a lot of different opinions and everyone's sort of weighing in, is that you almost put them in you give them a directive. So this is your responsibility to be on the pessimistic sort of side of this, and sort of, you know, to road test this idea, and this person to be on the positive, and this person's to think about the emotional side. And that helps when you have a very dynamic team of people who are constantly contributing. It just helps sort of hone the brainstorming session. Someone's just, the DeBona 6 thinking hats model. That's correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that brings me into saying, use the chat. If there's anything you want to add and contribute, please feel you can. And Joseph's just put in there, interested to hear a bit more about the battle it out phase. What are some good process for refining and prioritising ideas once the free-form creative exercises are over?
Well, I guess it comes down to, what are the positives and negatives of an idea, and what are the objectives. So I guess at that stage, when you've gone through the free form sort of creative exploration, as you will, it's always important to go back to the brief and make sure that your objectives, that these ideas are actually meeting the objectives that you have in the first place. You probably would have redefined some of the objectives just through the creative process anyway. And then the refinement, I guess, it comes down to, well, a little bit to what that idea is, because if it's a platform, then you're looking at functionality. If it's a concept in terms of how your team is working, you're talking about dynamics and behaviour. But I think it's a little bit about just finding the right elements of that idea that are worth taking forward, and sort of evaluating them on maybe on a little bit of a ranking scale as to what's more valuable than the other ones. So you go, look, both these ideas have X. Is this more important than Y? And that way you can start breaking down and prioritizing which one of those ideas are the more successful.
Excellent, thank you. Hannah, how do you encourage managers to ensure they allow for maximum creative thinking and creative outputs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's definitely one of the biggest barriers that we have in working culture, and particularly now that more people have gone virtual. For teams that were set up for remote working initially, their culture tends to have been lent towards virtual trust. For those that have had to adopt it in the last 4 months, we're seeing a lot of barriers in being able to give people creative freedom. So number one is trust. I mean, without it already being something that should be woven through your culture, the really important thing about trust in virtual space is that if you go into that meeting room over there and have your creative workshop, I can still see it. So there's an element where I think, well, it's okay if they're drawing on the wall, but they're in a workshop. For managers to give us trust to go off and have our creative time, they just have to trust that we're leaving our screen for 2 hours. And we might be doing that so, today, so Simon and I can meet up in Brighton and be here and brainstorm some things. But it might also be because I need to get some space, I need to go to a different environment, I need to go for a walk, I need to find some source of creativity. So firstly, you have to provide trust across that in the virtual space, that people have that dedicated creative time, and they don't feel like they constantly have to report back that they're on screen and they're present because they are kind of producing something that has a creative output. The second thing, which Simon's talked about a lot, is giving a voice to everyone. You will find as managers, when you do the refining and the battling it out process and you need to cross through some ideas, it won't feel like you're putting somebody's idea down and not taking it into account, because they all fed into that point. So to get to the end process, they were part of it and they did contribute. So whichever ideas you take forward, they did feed into. But the important thing as well about the voice for everybody is there's a huge productivity issue with virtual remote teams, because what happens is we put 12 people on a call and then we say, hey, Saffron, can you tell me what you think? And Simon, you tell me what you think. And then I say, great, thank you guys, see you next week. But what about all those other people that dialed into the call? And as managers, we have 2 questions, which is something Simon and I are rolling out internally, and for the team that are listening, they're finding out now that we're going to be doing that. But there's basically a question when you're a manager and you're holding a virtual brainstorm. If they're on the meeting, am I going to ask them to contribute an idea? And if I'm not, and they're just going to join the meeting and then they're going to leave the meeting without speaking, they probably shouldn't have been in the meeting. It will really help with virtual productivity and that Zoom fatigue, which is just so much back-to-back calls. And, you know, in the real environment, if somebody came to us in our team and said, you know what, I've got back-to-back meetings from 9 till 6, we would say, well, that's ridiculous. How are you ever going to get any work done? And it has to be true in virtual. When are we supposed to be doing our work? So one of the key things is to give a voice to everybody that is included, pass it round and let them have a voice. This one is the most important to me, is the blank piece of paper version of management, the blank piece of paper. And it's to remember always that more experience does not equal better ideas. Just because you have more experience does not mean that you will have a better idea. What it probably means is that when we get to the battle it out phase, you are able to help them refine things better, because you may understand the company direction, you may know something at board level that they don't know, you may have a better view of market, of sales strategy, you may know how it feeds into a project they're not aware of, but that initial creativity stage, just because you have more experience or different experience, does not mean that you will have a better idea. And actually we find, to Simon's point, those who diversify their learning and their interests more tend to have better ideas because they can pull from so many different sources of creativity. And it leads into the argument as to why we should diversify those voices. You know, somebody did one thing this weekend, somebody did another, and somebody did another. That's 3 different things that they've seen, rather than just talking to the same people who have had the same experience. So that blank piece of paper approach, give it to your team, give them a blank piece of paper, brief them well, and then stand back. Then have them pull the ideas, you join in at battle it out phase, give them the trust to go away and develop those ideas. And then the last thing is to weave creative culture into every day. So if it's small things like at school, at learning stage, we have show and tell. And what it does is it allows children who don't necessarily have the me, I want to talk, but it has everybody does show and tell, which is very, very helpful for getting all of those voices out. But also there's a confidence that comes from show and tell, because the interesting thing about the model of show and tell is that you'll only bring something that you already know about. No one gets up to show and tell to talk about a subject they don't understand. So if we had something every Friday morning for 10 minutes, which is a care to share, or something cool I found, a curious moment, whatever you want to call it, but something where people bring stuff and it fascinates them and they just want to share it. It really helps the breadth of creative voices. And Simon and I were working through a virtual platform problem this morning, and we used references from Waitrose and Ocado. We talked about Pizza Hut and Gymshark, and that none of those brands come into what we're doing, but they all had really different, interesting marketing campaigns. So create a dedicated time and space for sharing creative ideas.
Fantastic, thank you. We've ever since lockdown, we as a team, we're about 30 in our team, and we started 3 times a week. We'd have a huddle at 9 o'clock in the morning. And it was started very early that we gave it a 5-minute presentation on, initially it was supposed to be on your subject, your work, what things you've developed at work, but very quickly it became about things you're passionate about. And it's been just like that, show and tell. And it's been fantastic, actually. We've learned so much about our team, about the individuals. It's been a talking point throughout the day. I found myself talking about these 5-minute presentations to other people. You know, it's been educational. It's been really fantastic. So yeah, I think that's a really, really valid and worthy point there. Now we've for half an hour in, we've done the presentations, and now we're gonna just talk about, we're gonna take questions, and then yeah, we'll see what we go from there. Let me just look at the questions. Are you able to? Have you read them already, Hannah?
Yeah, so I can take Lexi's question around inviting and including managers and stakeholders to the creative session. So firstly, for my team that are watching, it is something I will get better at, I promise, before I preach something that isn't necessarily being practiced every day. No, going forward, the answer will be no. What they need to do is they need to brief really, really well. And that's important because it's also protecting the productivity and kind of what your expectations are. Because if anyone else is in an agency environment, and you know, the most frustrating thing is when the brief didn't come in right. So when you present your solution back to your clients, actually you were off the mark on the objectives. So you need to make sure the objectives of the work are really clear, and that we set the kind of the end goal of where we're hoping to get to. But the then the creative brainstorm, it should be allowed to be happening without your presence, and it will allow people to feel like they can have more of a voice. They share. It allows them to work out a lot of their own places within that team, because if a manager attends the kind of control of the meeting, the setting it up, how it's going to go, that it automatically falls to the most senior person in the room. So it allows people to find their own role in their team, much as they would if they were learning, in a school environment. People pull out, and then have them present back to you. I mean, it comes kind of back to the trust side of things, that ultimately, if we don't have all of that trust in the people to come up with the ideas, then they're probably not the people that we should have been putting into the creative brainstorm anyway, because we didn't value kind of their voice or giving a voice. So I think that would be useful to take them out. When it's product based, so I can see the question is really around developing products and route to market. I would still let that first brainstorm be a blank piece of paper, fail to fail, and fail quickly, and then it's your job to refine it and battle it out.
Wonderful, thank you. Sorry, John, I think Hannah did read out the question, but it was just about, do you invite and include managers, stakeholders to the brainstorm creative sessions and stakeholders? So yeah, thank you for that, Hannah. So if anyone else has got any questions, please do feel free to drop them in. It looks as if you've got some of your team on the call as well. Hannah, is that right?
Yes, yeah, we do. We have a few of them joining, who I'm sure will remind me of the fact that I said I wouldn't join all of their creative brainstorms after this.
So one of the things I was going to ask myself, we talked about a virtual sandpit, and I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. Simon, shall I ask that question to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the virtual sandpit is essentially what I was talking about with Dropbox paper, or it could potentially even be a WhatsApp or a chat function that allows you to upload imagery. And there's that opportunity to just have that messy play, to find an image that you find interesting, or find something that's relevant to the discussion at hand, and just quickly throw it up. Because, a lot of the times say, oh, I saw that thing that was really, really interesting, and that could be relevant. And then the pleasure of being in the virtual environment is that you can quickly on another screen just quickly Google it and just drop the link straight into the chat, or drop the image straight into the chat, and suddenly everyone's on the same page, as opposed to you spending 15 minutes trying to describe what this amazing campaign was for Waitrose. It's directly there. So that sandpit is just a place where you can start dumping resources and start putting those ideas into one sort of place, and start building and forming the concepts and the ideas out from that area.
Not as kinesthetic as a sandpit, unfortunately, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, no, sadly it's not, but there's the essence is still there, in which you're building sandcastles, if that's the analogy. But but you want people to contribute, and that's we've done exercises which we've actually had virtual chats, so we've actually had WhatsApp running at the exact same time, and we've done exercises with the team in which we've run a session, and then we've actually used the team to go out and take photographs with their phones of reference points within their house, and then they feed that back into the WhatsApp chat. So that was a really interesting exercise, because there was these two channels of communication, and there was a bit of energy in there as well. Like, go find something that references this point, and people went off, take a photograph, come back, it's in the chat starts going crazy with all those different bits and pieces, and the conversation flowed from there. So don't be afraid to use different platforms and throw them together. So
I think one of the fascinating things that's come out of the revised Ofsted standards for the virtual classrooms for teaching at home is that actually they're still doing a lot of the art and crafting work, but actually they're finding that the outputs are more creative. So what happened in school was we would say, okay, everybody's going to use paper to build a volcano. That's great. But the problem that I've got is that I'm already watching how Simon's building his volcano, and it's going to inform how I build my volcano, and I'm taking in all of those factors. What's been interesting about the fact that they're still getting children to do that at home, and they're bringing them to show and tell, is that actually it is that individual's creative response to their volcano, because they weren't concerned about what Simon was doing and what Saffron was doing and whether or not mine was silly, because in that moment, that's how I saw my volcano. So they're still encouraging children to do the physical play and to build things. And when they come back and show them, there's actually this really nice element that comes from that remote working, because it's whatever I saw the project as. So that's something else as well, is to allow people to go off and have their individual response. But when they come back, they all get their voice to present back why. And that's the really important thing, why they built their volcano that way. Because even if they built their volcano in the shape of a circle, the question will be, well, why did you do it that way? And that's where you will find out what happened in their creative thinking process, not by just finding out that mine and Simon's volcanoes look the same. So that's kind of an interesting model of the still allowing some physical build time.
I'd have to add to that I'm sure they would have to ask the parents, and the parents' creativity would have got involved there with the virtual learning. I went to a friend of mine.
For your own volcano, Saffron.
Well, I remember the Trojan horse challenge and the problems with that. That was an interesting parent challenge. It's all good fun. One of my friends at the weekend, I've got children myself, so I went to a friend of mine, and she actually had a printout of an Ofsted inspection on her window, as there's been so many parents teaching at home, you know, and the challenges that have come with that. Georgina's dropped in a question there, so I'll just read that out. How can you support different personalities to contribute in a brainstorm? For example, introverts and extroverts. Should you create different output platforms to suit personalities, or encourage personalities to adapt to the output platform? Hannah, shall I pass it to you?
Yeah, I will answer briefly because it looks like Simon was just...
No, I was going to point to you, Hannah. I was going to point to you.
Yeah, so one of the interesting activities that we can do in that as well is to not tell people how we expect to see their response. So as an example with the volcano, is rather than say, can you build a volcano? What we would do is we say, can I get a 1-minute presentation from you on what's best to eat for breakfast? But the format that you respond in is completely up to you. And that's important for respecting individual creativity, particularly in different roles as well, because we have barriers to creativity if we're in roles where we're not kind of perceived to be creative. So what that does is that allows one person to present a PowerPoint if they want to. It allows one person to talk. I don't respond well with slides at all unless they're single image. So that allows that response. Maybe somebody wants to do a quick video of them talking to you. Maybe somebody wants to show you them cooking their breakfast. Maybe somebody wants to use an image of their favorite breakfast. But two things happen there. One, on the audience view, and we're getting a little bit into virtual events, but one on the audience view of that, what's really important is that everybody learns in different ways. And one of the big challenges that we have from virtual is that we tend to feed information to them in one way. So by us using, we use our own platform for all of our virtual events, but otherwise if we talk at people, if there are accessibility to learning issues, if there are language barriers, if there are people who respond better visually, then by just talking, we're already creating some barriers to that creative response. So if we don't define the output from the creative and we allow everybody in our team to present back in the way that's right for them, not only are we allowing them to explore their own creativity in terms of their personality and how they express themselves, but we're also going to see a really diverse range of responses on the creative, which should therefore speak to a wider audience. And that will really help as well if our stakeholders also kind of engage in those different ways, because they will see it in different forms. I hope that's helpful. There's a question, I think some are coming through privately and some are coming through publicly, but there's a separate question around any creative solutions to working virtually across different time zones.
Yeah, I'm just on that one from John. I think there's a couple of approaches there. One is, if you're using a virtual sandpit where you can actually put down ideas from one time zone, and then people, when they wake up or when they're active and at work on their other time zone, they can then comment and contribute to that. So it almost becomes like an extended brainstorming session. That's one opportunity. You can't really beat having a bit of FaceTime. So if you can get a little bit of FaceTime, if those time zones overlap, that's always a plus. But we developed a program, didn't develop a program, we developed a website in which we had some developers that were remote, and we weren't able to do video chats quite so often because of the time zone difference. So we found it very easy just to get the camera on your phone or the camera on your laptop and just record a whole range of ideas and points that you wanted to discuss. And then we almost had this virtual conversation just through just recording video and sharing it through either email or WeTransfer or anything like that. Or even putting it directly onto Dropbox paper, and that worked really well. Specifically, if you wanted to talk through features on a product, sometimes I'm the worst at this, is that I get so tired of writing these really long emails, and I think it's just fatigue for the people on the other end. It's so much easier just to record yourself 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and just share it over the internet, and then you're just going to make a lot more progress that way.
Yeah, I think that's really valid. I think it's incredible how you can connect with people over FaceTime, and how valuable that kind of video conferencing is. I was talking to one of our members yesterday, and he was saying that Tech Day was something we were promoting last week, and it was held in New York, but it was marketed across London as well. But all of the presentations were actually pre-recorded, so it was properly broadcasted and scheduled, and it avoided all of the problems that can come with connectivity and Wi-Fi and can we hear you properly and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, we're in an on-demand kind of world that we live in. So things are going down that route, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. Pre-recorded. I mean, I think it was Microsoft who did a LinkedIn broadcast, a live broadcast, and from their CEO, and that was all pre-recorded. And they didn't hide the fact, because he jumped around different cities. He went from Seattle to California and all over the place. There's some benefits to doing the pre-record for a streaming or for a virtual event. One of the benefits is that the production quality can be, you know, dramatically improved, because you can improve the sound and the vision, and there's a little bit more dedication and opportunities to do the production value of the filming. When it's live, you have to consider bandwidth and how much streaming capability there is in the location of where people are. So we do both, but the pre-recorders always has a few beneficial elements to it. The only downside with the pre-record is the opportunity to do a Q&A like this. So we always find that, you know, maybe it's a little bit of a hybrid of both, where we do a pre-record for the presentation and then we cut to a live session which has this kind of dialogue, and then people can Q&A.
Yeah, I think that's obviously really important, and that's how broadcasting's worked. You know, so we've known radio and television for years, and I think now people are expecting to have things on demand. So whether we'll go to these webinars pre-recorded, I don't know, but at the moment, live's working for us anyway. So yeah, John's just put in a comment there, just saying thank you. Already a Sandpit user, and found that the time delay for feedback limits creativity for the team. We also have regular tri-weekly catch-ups, face-to-face in Teams, WhatsApp. The short FaceTime clips is a great one. Yeah, it really is.
I mean, you probably tell from my accent, but I'm actually Australian, and I have in-depth conversations with my sisters and my family just by recording short WhatsApp voicemails, and, you know, rather than typing all this stuff. And it's an extended conversation, but it's a very quick way of just sending a message to someone. Hey, I've had this really great idea. This could work. This may not work. What do you think? Send. And suddenly that's one less email that person has to read.
Yeah.
So, if you can't do the video, then that's a great way of doing it too.
The other thing, to John's point, kind of about the limiting creativity across time zones. So one of the things that we can do, and we have our office here, and we have a team in the US, so we kind of feel those challenges. But one of the things that also comes back from trust with managers is also empowering different people in the creative process. So one of the things that we can do is we can put different people in charge of different projects. And that doesn't just mean, okay, you do all the work and everything is signed off by the same person. It means that we empower different people with different sign-off. So if we give somebody in the US a project and they're responsible for this project, they're truly responsible and they're the top of the tree on that project. And it's one of the things that's really important when we look at hierarchy and creativity as well, is if it's somebody's project, then they own that project, because we're giving them the trust to do that. So we can feed into different people. So what we can do is have somebody in Singapore having one project and they own it. So they take creative feedback in from all markets and all time zones, but it's their sign off for that piece. And it's the same then for New York and for London. So people are actually owning different creative projects, because at some point we can't have everybody feed into the same level. At some point somebody needs to sign off, but mix up that person who gets to sign off the pieces of work, but different people in responsible for the projects, because they will move along much quicker. John?
Yeah, John's just added there that he bizarrely, stupidly, perhaps, I use short video clips of some of the commercial partners, but not his own team. So he's learned something new. And yeah, that happens all the time, doesn't it? It's good to have these discussions to learn how you should be doing something internally when you're doing it all the time. I had that exact same situation yesterday. So yeah, I think it's really important to keep these conversations going. And I think from my perspective, the virtual world has been really beneficial to working with the team. I work in a remote location to most of my team. So now the fact that we all became remote was really helpful to the growth of the team, I feel. And I don't know if you've got some contribution to that, Simon, at all.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we're living in such a strange time, and I think that from a team growth point of view, I think what's when you do have the dedicated time to have a one-to-one virtual conversation with one of your team members, it becomes a little bit more intimate, definitely, because it is just very focused on just one-to-one. There's no other distractions. No one's, you're not looking for the next conversation, or you're not walking past each other. So it's like, hey, let's take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to talk about the project, and let's sort of, talk about what's going on with other creative concepts as well. So in that sense, I think it's been really beneficial, in terms of the ones-to-ones. At Cheerful, we do quite a few sort of team exercises together, like quizzes, and we have a great social team who put all that stuff together. So we invite our suppliers as well, just to sort of encourage this harmonious unit and promoting the industry. And I think there's another element which I think is really interesting about the virtual world that we're in at the moment, is that we're seeing directly into people's homes. So you're getting a bit of a sense of the personality and the art that they like. I'm looking at you, Saffron.
It was strategically placed. I didn't literally move that specifically for Zoom, but it's worked out very well.
But I think that sort of starts another conversation, a little bit about us as individuals and things that I like. And I know I've had conversations with our team in New York, and that's already sort of broken down a bit of a barrier between us, because the artwork on the wall is something that I was very interested in as well. So it's I think that works great in that sense.
Yeah, obviously it's the kiss, and my partner pointed out to me, I don't know if you can see, but it actually looks as if there is a mobile phone laying beside his head if you look closely at the artwork. It's obviously a very old picture. The old black picture looks like he's just left a mobile phone on the side of the bed, which is quite funny. Okay, so Lexi has put another comment in there. With diverse groups, especially participants who are not so tech savvy or familiar with online collaborative tools, how do you overcome tech issues such as learnability around navigating these platforms? As much as possible, you don't want usability and learnability of the platform to take over the scope of the creative brainstorm. I've found this to be a bottleneck in some situations. Simon?
Yeah, I think there's going to be an adoption process with some of this technology. I think where everyone is in terms of their Zoom skills is a lot further on than where they were when Zoom first came out. But I mean, it is a little bit of a challenge, no doubt. I think, if you're going to prepare a brainstorm session, preparation is key. So perhaps part of that initial sort of brief for what the brainstorm is meant to be, and making sure that people have the tools in front of them, and making sure the desk is clean, is a little bit of housekeeping to go, look, this is the platform that we're going to be using to sort of our virtual sandpit. So let's just quickly run through how to build this, and if you have any issues, let's talk about it quickly, and let's get some technical advice on how to get that ready for the actual brainstorm, so that when you're going through the brainstorm session, you are just focused on the task at hand, as opposed to should I, what does this do, but there is a bit of a challenge with all this new technology that's coming out, and every platform is slightly different, regardless of how user-friendly they claim it is.
I think it's also important for people to remember that telephones do still exist. The amount of times where we could have called each other, and sometimes with Simon, I will just ring him on the telephone, and that's, we've been staring at a screen of faces all day, and I just need to run an idea by him. There's no need for us to be on this screen situation. So I'll call him on a regular telephone. So there's also a simplicity that can also happen to it. If you want to get somebody's idea, you can you can text them, you can WhatsApp them, but you can also phone them. And while we need to make sure that they do adopt the technology, because otherwise moving forward it will become a barrier and they will be left out of that forward progression, we can take it back to the simpler side of whatever works for the individual that allows them to continue being engaged at this time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There you go. We've managed to get to 54 minutes. So I'm just going to wrap up now. So thank you so much for joining us. We will follow up tomorrow with some information from Cheerful 21st on how you can follow up and get Simon or Hannah to work with you and your team. So do let us know if you'd like to hear more, and we'll share details. I'm just going to share my screen again. Hang on a second. Let's get this right. And there you go. Hopefully you can see that now. So thank you again to the European Regional Development Fund for bringing this event to you. These events have been going, as I say, for 20 weeks now. Next week we have a webinar, and we'll see if I can find the details now. My colleague was supposed to be coming online and she's unable to join us. Let me just get the details up of next week's webinar, which is on sustainable futures. So the topics have been really varied and obviously very interesting as well. I'm just going to stop sharing and pull these details up. Next week, yeah, sustainable futures. We've got Darren Howarth, CEO of Sea Level, coming to join us, and Anya Ledwith, founder of environmental management consultancy Eshcon, coming to join us. So please join us again. That's 1 o'clock on Wednesday. We are, obviously, the Innovation Centre is based in Falmer. There's one in Croydon. We've got even post-COVID, a vibrant community of ambitious companies. We're looking after each other. You know, there's more space in our innovation centres than in some homes. And we have a really good initiative on at the moment, which is all about flexibility, Sussex Stars, which Hannah and Simon have taken advantage of today and are using a meeting room very flexibly. You don't need to be a member. You can come in there, drop in, use our co-working, use our meeting rooms. Everything is COVID secure, and it would be great to see you there. Daisy's just dropping some links in. Yes, so the Sussex Stars link is there, and a few other links to the meetings that are happening next week. So yeah, just time for me to say thank you again to Simon and Hannah. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. And yeah, we'll speak to you again soon. Let me just see if there's more messages there. Just some more links from Daisy, so do click in the links. And thank you for joining us all. See you then. Thank you.